I'm going to start today's talk just by taking you through why I'm interested in this topic. Obviously, it's a huge topic for the industry, but why I personally have been looking into this and have been interested in it. As Nick said, I'm the distiller for Jensen's Gin. I joined the company in January 2013, and at the time, both our gins were being made by Charles Maxwell and his team down at Thames. My job was firstly to build myself a distillery, and then to bring all the production of the gin in-house. My background is as a synthetic organic chemist. I had a vast experience of distilling highly toxic chemicals, but I had a lot to learn about how to make gin. And so I began by just talking to people and asking people a lot about some of the opportunities and the challenges I would face when bringing the production in-house. And something that was mentioned time and time again was, well, your gins are currently being made as multi-shot gins, and you should make sure that when you bring them in-house, you turn them into single-shot products. My response to that was always why? And the answers were incredibly vague. There was a general feeling that single-shot gins are better, but no one could give me a definitive reason. So I decided to sort of look into it a little more. So what are multi and single shot gins? What am I talking about? Actually, interestingly, there's no official definition or official rules about what is a single or a multi-shot gin. And in fact, when I started to talk to people, I realised there was a lot of confusion out there about what they were. I spoke to one distiller who didn't even realise you could make a multi-shot gin, and heard about another one who was already making a multi-shot but didn't realise it. So for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to define them as follows. A single shot gin is a gin that only water is added to post-distillation to blend it to bottling strength. So if you have an 80% distillate that you collect off your still and 100 litres of it, and you want to make a 40% gin, you blend it down with water and you get 200 litres of gin that you can bottle. A multi-shot gin, when you're making it, you add far greater quantity of botanicals to the still, which results in a much more heavily flavoured distillate. This distillate is then cut down with NGS before it is blended with water to bottling strength. Now, because there are no legal requirements about how much of the distillate needs to go into the final product, there's a huge wide range of ratios of distillate to NGS that are out there, meaning that if you have an 100 litres of an 80% distillate of a multi-shot gin, you're going to get a much greater quantity than 200 litres of gin that you can bottle. So that's all well and good. Out there are people who are big fans of either route and critics of either route. So over the last, couple of days, I have been approaching distillers who have very kindly got back to me with their thoughts about both routes. So we'll start with why make a single shot gin. So if we talk about the pros, I think everyone who made a single shot gin was keen to say that they thought that single shot gins were smoother. And the reason for this was they said every single milliliter of alcohol that is in the final product has gone through your pot still. They said that single shot gins have better flavour integration and balance. Interestingly, both fans and critics of the single shot method said that making a single shot gin gave an impression or a perception of quality. Impression and perception being quite key words there. And there was one small distiller who said that it gave him a point of difference. So when he was talking about the processes he made to make his gin, it was the fact that he was making a single shot gave him something to talk about in comparison with the big guys out there. And then finally, everyone agreed that the cons of making a single shot gin is maintaining consistency batch to batch, which becomes quite difficult. So moving on to why make a multi-shot gin. The pros. Again, both fans and critics of making a multi-shot gin agreed that it was far more economical to make a gin via this route. In power usage, in water usage, and in time. Obviously, one run of a still creates a far greater volume of gin, which means that if you're a small distillery, you can scale up production quite a bit without actually having to invest in any more equipment or any more space. Similarly, if you're a small distillery and like Jensen's, we're a tiny team down at Jensen's, the distiller actually has the time to do other jobs and take up other roles within the business rather than just being tied to the still the whole time. those people who bottle off-site or even bottle abroad, obviously making a multi-shot gin massively decreases their transportation and their storage costs. This third one was mentioned, which I found quite interesting actually, which I hadn't thought about. But if you wanted to make a gin, you know, a lot of people are making gins with local botanicals, trying to bring some form of terroir into their gin. And if you make a gin with a botanical that's only around for a couple of months of the year, a multi-shot method far easily gives you the opportunity to make enough gin and also store enough gin to sort of oversee all your forecasted sales for a year, which is quite useful. Both fans and critics agreed that multi-shot gins enabled a much more consistent flavour delivery. And the fans of a multi-shot method said that if the recipe is optimised, and that is obviously very key here, there is no discernible flavour difference between either a multi or a single shot gin. So what are the cons? The main cons seem to be around and the fact that there is an assumption that when you are talking about high volume production, there is an assumption that at some point in the process you've had to make a compromise on quality. And that was the major con. So I wanted to look at this a little bit further. So I decided, forgot that bit. It's very important to say that if you're only using NGS and water, you can still call your multi-shot gin a London Dry gin. It's not a London Dry, which is obviously very important. So investigating this further then, I decided to make 3 samples that I called single, multi-1 and multi-2. I wanted to avoid any level of bias and I wanted to control as many variables as I possibly could. So I actually lifted this gin recipe from David's book, sorry David, for a classic gin, which is 20 parts juniper, 4 parts coriander, 2 parts angelica, 2 parts citrus and 1 part orris. I scaled the botanicals up from a single shot concentration absolutely linearly with no recipe optimization to give multi-1 and multi-2. They were all left to macerate overnight in the distillery in a wheat-based NGS. They were all distilled on exactly the same apparatus, on exactly the same scale, and I took exactly the same heads and tails cut, and I did that via volume, nothing else. I then blended them down to a 40% drinking strength. For a single, obviously 100% of it was the distillate, there was no NGS in there. For the multi-1, I chose a 1:3 ratio of distillate to NGS, and then for multi-2, I chose a 1:25 ratio of distillate to NGS. I think these are all very well and good, but what I wanted to do was to put that into context. So a distiller making a single shot gin on, say, a 500 litre still, that will give you about 200 litres of distillate. In a day, this guy can make 570 bottles. This guy can make over 14,000, which is quite a big difference. So next I wanted to test them, and the best way I figured of testing them was to carry out a blind tasting. So at the end of David's talk earlier, you were asked to taste 4 samples of gin and to fill in a gin evaluation sheet. And I've hurriedly, and I have to say hurriedly, sorted out the results. So please excuse the fact that I haven't really done a deep evaluation of what has come out of here. But the first question, and all these results are being reported as averages of the score, with a graph also showing the standard deviation in each case. So for flavour integration and balance, I mean, I have to say all these graphs are pretty similar as well, which is interesting in itself. There wasn't a massive difference, and I don't know how much of this can be taken against the fact that obviously by this point you've already tasted two neat gins, and you know you're just getting a bit bored of putting scores in. Interestingly, the biggest variation was on C. The others were, these are pretty concise. Again, I'm not sure how much you can draw from that. For smoothness or lack of burn, there's a definite tail off towards, well, as definite as this is, tail off towards D. Again, I don't know how much of that is to do with tasting, but here, interestingly, the standard deviation is pretty similar, so we're not getting much variation in terms of what people are thinking at this point. Your personal score. Again, C slightly scored more, but again, standard deviation was less, so that's quite tight. B was quite tight. I think that maybe you could say that B possibly won because there's slightly less standard deviation there. But I'm not convinced you can really pull anything from this. And then finally, there was a variation between the samples. And I think everyone kind of agreed that there was a definite variety. It wasn't the same gin you were tasting at that point. So I think this is kind of interesting. And I was actually hoping to have some more analytical results to give you, but my chemist emailed me this morning and said that he was failing to get them to me. So I'm really sorry about this. It's a very short talk. I'm just going to finish with the identity of the samples. What I want to do here is, before I put out there what I know they are, I want to find out if anyone feels like they can take a guess as to which one was the single shot. Anyone? Could anyone put a hand even to say that they're confident which one was the single shot? Did anyone think that did they realise they were tasting a single shot versus a multi-shot at the time? Okay. Does it surprise you that one of those was 1 to 25 and the other one was a single shot? Okay. Cool. Well, I'm going to go with. I mean, I just want to go back and let's look at smoothness, because I always think that smoothness is quite interesting, because that's the one that people often say when they're talking about a single shot gin. They always say that it is the smoothest of the two. And I guess A kind of wins if we're going to go with these results. So if we go back now to the identity of the samples, the A is actually the one that is a 1 to 3 mixture of concentrate to NGS. B is the 1 to 25. C was the single shot, which Jonathan, you hated.
I hated it.
You hated it, and I was sat next to you while you tried it. And then D was actually also B, which was also the 1 to 25. So I think, A, that shows quite how flawed just doing a blind tasting is. But also, I think it's interesting that I think there are a lot of people in this room who would categorically have stood up and said that they could pick out a multi-shot gin because of the smoothness of the gin. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily true. Just putting it out there. So what conclusions can we draw? So for me personally, I think that obviously if there's no recipe optimization involved, then the method by which you make the gin, whether it's multi or single shot, causes a huge difference in the flavour of your resulting gin. I don't think it's as clear-cut as saying one way is better than the other, and I don't think that you can say that just by making a single shot gin you're going to get a much better quality gin than making a multi-shot. And I think as an industry, as a whole, we have this incredible opportunity to educate a highly engaged consumer base and educate them about our spirit. And I think we need to be careful about making sweeping statements. One of the things I think I'd like to see is that instead of looking at this as an incorrect or a correct method of making a gin, maybe distillers should start to think of it as a tool. It's a tool that we can use to control the final flavour of our product.